Welcome back to Big Riff Energy. First of all, I want to get to some fan mail. It's been a while since I've been able to catch up with this, so I'm going to dive right in. If you don't hear yours at the beginning, I'm going to read some more at the end. I just don't want to overwhelm everybody with just fan mail right out of the gate. I appreciate everybody that reached out after the last episode. I mentioned that one was kind of tricky for me. I subconsciously was like putting it off, really didn't want to do it. And while I was doing it, I was like, does anybody give a shit about this? And I was kind of weirded out by the whole thing. But it's a similar thing like with making music too. I think the stuff that we feel the most uncomfortable about putting out there and maybe the most vulnerable, and there's some like internal resistance and like fear of judgment and fear of like not being accepted, maybe. I think that is the stuff that tends to resonate with other people. So I'm glad I did that, and I really appreciate. A lot of y'all hit me up about that stuff, and I really appreciate it. A lot of people talking about struggles they're going through, the cycle of life and death and darkness and light and ups and downs and all that. I want to shout out Eric, who lost a family member, unfortunately, but fortunately gained a family member. It's that cycle of life, baby, the river. Also want to shout out Jordan and his husky, who are over there by Loretta Lynn's old stomping grounds. I guess you came out and saw us in Louisville. What's up, man? Also, thanks to everybody who hit me up about the Darkness Permission to Land vinyl reissue. I got a lot of texts and emails about that, and I was psyched. I did a whole podcast, a different podcast, where we talked about that album, and it was the next day they announced the reissue. So psyched on that. At first, I thought there was only like a 5 LP, like $200 version, but they did way more affordable release as well. So I got that. Speaking of vinyl, our new album, Ghost at the Gallows, is coming out like 4 weeks from now. If you're in Europe or the UK, go to evilgreed.net. Get this dark green, limited vinyl, forest green. Yeah, that's Europe and UK, evilgreed.net. Over here in the States, I guess you could order it from wherever, really, if you want the rare one. Revolver Magazine Shop has the ruby red, matches the ribbon in the owl's mouth, which we'll get into on the making of Ghost at the Gallows. And then our main distributor of merch in Florida is Night Shift Merch. So go over there and get the silver vinyl. That's the band exclusive. These are going to be gone by the time the album comes out. So if you haven't done it yet, do it. I promise you the rest of the songs on the record are good. The best songs in my book didn't even come out as the singles. So if you like the singles, pre-order that shit. It's worth experiencing in the physical realm and not just in the metaverse. Okay, fan mail. Lee. Man, I'm going to say you guys don't have to. I feel very strange reading some of these on the podcast because I feel like stroking my own ego. And I love like getting nice emails and stuff, but just so you know, you don't have to pump me up to get me to read this shit. Even if you send me an email telling me I'm an asshole, I'll read it still. But Lee, you said, you've kept me company and given me some great stories over the last week of binging your videos. I think some of y'all discovered this podcast through the best albums of 2023 thing that I did, which is so funny. Like I put in all the buzzwords and like the buzz headline and did the YouTube style editing with all the quick cuts and shit. And that video has like the most views I've ever, anything I've ever, I think it's at like 15,000 views or something right now. So that shit works. It's weird. There's like a science behind it. It's goofy as hell, but it works. Anyway, Lee says, you've kept me company and given me some great stories over the last week of binging your videos. I've also listened to Deadbird, Ashbury, and Wake as a result of your show and have been digging all of them. I also really appreciate the recognition you give to the visual artists who are tied with your music. Absolutely, man. It's a full package. Lee has a YouTube podcast called Heavy Art Talk, where he discusses visual art and that sort of stuff. A couple of months ago, he had Adam Burke on the show, and they discussed the process of making the Enlighten and Eternity painting. Lee goes on to say this painting really pushed him as an artist because the composition is pretty technically demanding. And if you feel inclined to hear about it, we talk about it at the 117 mark. That's on YouTube, Heavy Art Talk. Yeah, Adam had a time with that, and I feel for him, man. So I'll talk about the cover of Enlighten and Eternity, publicly stating right now the idea was mashing up Molly Hatchet beating the odds with Bob Seger Against the Wind. I wanted Against the Wind, but like metal version, like Frank Frazetta version of that, you know. And then when our dogs passed, you know, I was like, can you put some dogs in there too, as if there's not enough challenging shit going on. And I think Adam got a little frustrated with that. I remember him saying something on social media about like how he was sick of metal dudes and all their demands and shit. And I get it. But dude, if you guys are adults and you're feeling some kind of way, don't put it on the internet. Just fucking scream and hit something like people have been doing since the dawn of time. But yeah, nothing against Adam. I'm sure that shit was frustrating. Okay, Lee goes on, in terms of a fan question, I was curious what your routine and habit of reading books looks like. I asked because sometimes it's hard to find the time and space to read a book, but I think a lot of that comes down to discipline. Yeah, and he talks about the Dave Grohl book being very engaging and hilarious, especially as an audiobook. I did read that, Storyteller. It's good. Dave Grohl's got a crazy story, man. I've been sucking at reading books lately. I've got to read Soul on Fire, the Peter Steele book. I'm reading this music business book that makes me want to just quit the music business, period. I'm going to throw it in the trash when I'm done with it. Literally, fuck the music business completely from one side of the street to the other. What else? I'm fucking painstakingly forcing myself to read this stupid ass book about the music business, which like a lot of the music business is predicated on stuff that was passed in like 1909. They're talking about fucking crank up phonograph records, trying to apply that to like digital streaming and stuff. So that's going in the trash. As soon as that goes in the trash, I'm reading the Peter Steele book, like I said, Geezer Butler's autobiography, and this new Quincy Jones book. I don't read stuff that I'm interested in. That's it. I only read stuff that I'm like dying to know about, which is why I've been struggling lately, because this music business book fucking sucks. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. All right, Joe Baird, Innate Hope All as well. Seen you in St. Louis twice this past year. Once at the Old Rock House. That's the longest set Spirit Adrift's ever played. We played every song that we know. And then he saw us with Midnight. Hope they didn't take a merch cut. They didn't. Nobody took a merch cut on the Midnight tour. And we got a higher guarantee than any tour we've done. So don't tell me it can't be done. Anyway, we spoke for a bit at Red Flag. I was the guy in the Wayland shirt. Just a message to say how much I enjoy your music and Big Riff Energy. Working on getting caught up. I'm only on episode 6, but I really appreciate your recommendations. I will say I'm not feeling Resin so much. Saw them with King Buffalo in January. I think I'll need to revisit that album. Yeah, Joe, it's something that's right on the line of something that I would not normally enjoy, but give it another listen, man. Side note, we played with King Buffalo in France. That man's really cool. Really nice guys, too. Joe says, lastly, very glad you are a Yob fan. I am as well. A road trip to Lawrence, Kansas, early June to finally see them. They were great. Actually bumped into Mike at a ramen shop in Lawrence. We ended up eating ramen together and talking music and travel for 30 minutes. Super nice guy. Mike is the best guy. Mike is, I love my dad and I love my grandfather, but for a music father figure, Mike is the guy. I hope I'm not embarrassing him, but man, I fucking love Mike from Yob so much. And everybody does. I mean, how could you not? He's amazing. So here's a picture of me and Joe from St. Louis. And here's a picture of Mike and Joe in St. Louis. Killer. I remember you, Joe. You're a nice guy, man. Thanks for writing in, and I hope you can get caught up. All right, one more until I get to the task at hand. This is Chris H from Canada. Chris said a lot of really nice stuff, which I'm not going to say on here, but thank you, Chris. So I'm trying to get around that as much as I can here. But he says, your music makes life more fun and your albums kick ass in a way that makes every day a bit smoother. That fucking rules. That's like the ultimate compliment. That's how I feel about Black Sabbath and shit. So Chris says, I was traveling around Canada trying to locate the next place I'll settle down the last couple weeks and was cranking Spirit Adrift and listening to all your podcasts. You say some very deep stuff. I don't know about all that. And keep it real. Yeah, probably. And hearing you be as authentic to your vision as you are is an inspiration and made me feel more centered in who I am. Just hearing you talk as I drove made me make sense of a few things and more deeply appreciate all the great bands you talk about, like snap of the fingers alignment back to what matters in life and music. That probably sounds a bit odd, but is my way of saying, please keep doing whatever it is you're doing because you're vibrating at a very cool level. Man, I got to have a reminder of that, like constant. I have to remind myself literally on a constant basis, dude, like the stuff that's tripping me out doesn't matter. None of it matters. I've heard it called future tripping, you know. I think I'm going to name a song Future Tripping because we all do that. And one of the wisest guys I've ever known and a guy that has done more for me than he'll ever know, I've heard him say, the past is guilt, the future is fear, stay in the now. And that's cliche and obvious, but there's something about the human mind, man, that drags us out of the present moment. And I don't think that we used to be able to do that as much because there was a lot more of a present, constant threat to our safety. When we were more primitive creatures, you know, we couldn't start tripping too much on the future and imagining things because you might get killed by something, you know. And I don't think people carried around as much guilt about the past or as much regret or stuff like that. When you're in survival mode, it's like our natural state as human beings is supposed to be like in the present moment. But we've got so much physical comfort and safety and all that, which is good, but it allows us a little bit too much freedom to explore the future and things that could go wrong, or explore the past and things we could have done differently. But you know, the only thing that actually exists is right now. When you're thinking about the future, that's an imaginary thought in your head. By the time the future gets here, it's now, right? And if you're thinking about the past, that's in your memory, which is in your brain. It doesn't exist, right? It's gone. So anyway, sorry to get all philosophical, but music is a good way of snapping me into the present, right? Nature, looking at my dogs. We rescued these dogs. They'd be dead if it wasn't for us, man. Not like, look how great I am, but it's like, I look at them sometimes and I'm just like, fuck all this stuff that I think isn't working out the way I want it to, or like I'm hoping this or wishing that, or like comparing myself to what other people are doing or whatever. And I'll just look at one of these dogs and be like, man, that dog is awesome. And they're like alive and happy. And I did that. And we did that. And like, we're living this life together. It's cool, man. So music can do that. Art, you know, it used to be like thrill seeking for me. You know, if you put yourself in a life or death situation, you become present very quick. When your friend picks you up in his grandma's single cab pickup truck and without telling you ramps you at 90 miles an hour over a railroad track, you're present. You're not in the future and you're not in the past. So I don't know. I do a little bit of thrill seeking still, but it's mainly, dude, just like mindfulness and music. And yeah, podcasting is a cool art form because I think I underestimate what listening to cool podcasts does for my my well-being, man. And just like being able to relate to other people when you feel terminally unique or perpetually alone. I think it's cool to just like hear other people saying stuff that's the same as what you're feeling, you know? So yeah, happy to be a part of it, man. All right. Today is another topic that I've been kind of dreading because I feel like if I don't plan these out, I don't write myself notes or anything like that. I feel like there's things that subjects I could come across that might be a little bit treacherous and piss people off the wrong way if I don't say it the way that I really feel. And I don't want to disrespect people on here, especially people I don't know or just like generalize too much. But I'm going to just dive in. Today I'm going to talk about punk and hardcore. And just my experience with that type of music and that culture, whatever you want to call it. I've talked plenty about metal. I've talked plenty about Southern rock and FM rock radio stuff that I grew up with and old country. And I don't think I've talked about like 3-6 Mafia and old school rap, Dr. Dre and NWA and stuff like that. I love that stuff too. I grew up on that kind of stuff as well. But I definitely haven't talked about getting into punk and hardcore all that much. I've mentioned it here and there, but yeah. So Sabbath got me into heavy music. From Sabbath, it was Metallica, and Metallica, covered Last Caress and a couple other Misfits songs. But when you hear Last Caress, when you're 13 or 14, it makes a fucking impression, right? And so I think the first punk thing that I went out and bought with my own money was the Misfits Coffin, with the CDs, and it had the Fiend Club pin and all this cool stuff. And there was a lot of material, but man, the Misfits were my favorite band for a minute. And I got the shirt with the Fiend skull on it, like before anybody was wearing that. There was nobody wearing that in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And then all of a sudden, now, I think right around that time in the early 2000s, it ended up becoming like a meme before the internet, but dude, the Misfits was exciting music. I loved it. I still love it. That, man, all that Danzig era Misfits stuff is like still some of my favorite music. And, later I got into Earth AD, which to me is like maybe the first thrash metal album. You could say that. It's proto thrash for sure. And that I would almost like separate that out from the rest of their catalog. I love that album like on a whole other level. But I love the Evil Elvis stuff too, man. Like I think it's so funny and clever to have a band that, like, if you break down their songs, it's 50s radio rock. It's 50s rock and roll, but it's being played by horror movie monsters. And the lyrics are all about murder and death and ripping people's skulls out and killing babies and stuff. And that to me is such like a brilliant concept. The whole presentation, everything, like those guys had a vision of this whole package, and it was so appealing when I was a teenager. And I met Jimmy Bower when I was very young. Metallica led to Misfits, and Metallica also led to Slayer, which led to Pantera, and then Pantera led to like way more underground stuff. Through them, I got into Dark Throne and Sepultura and death metal, sludge metal, right? Got an I Hate God and Crowbar and stuff like that. So Pantera was one gateway to the underground. Mastodon, I think, was the other gateway to the underground because their first album came out in 2003, so I was 15, right? And they led me to like Neurosis and the Melvins and stuff like that. And I was into High on Fire at the time. So that's sort of like the current underground stuff. Whereas Pantera led me to underground stuff that's kind of had already existed, right? I Hate God and stuff like that. And yeah, long story. I'll tell it some other time, but met Jimmy Bower when I was very young. And he was sort of my intro to punk and hardcore outside of the Misfits, right? Like he told me about Black Flag, and equally importantly, told me about Carnivore. I'll never forget him introducing me to Carnivore, and he said, "This is the most pissed off record ever made." And he's right. It still is. Um, so Jimmy, when I guess I was 17 when I met him, you know, he introduced me to Black Flag, which was a major thing. I remember getting Damaged first and putting it on. And, you know, I'm used to like Metallica and Slayer records, and Rick Rubin produced stuff. And I remember being like, man, this sounds like dog shit. And it does, but like that's part of the appeal. Is I would come to find out that like the context of those bands was they were getting sick of AOR. That's album oriented rock, right? So Genesis and Styx and stuff like that. And there's good AOR bands. And they were getting sick of stuff like the Eagles and just overproduced, inflated, like arena rock. And I've come now later to love a lot of that stuff, but at the time I didn't, and neither did Black Flag. They hated it, but these guys hated everything. You know, I went from Damage to like My War and the Rollins era stuff and worked my way back. I prefer the Rollins era stuff personally. I love the stuff with Dez on vocals, and I love Jealous Again. I'm not so much into the really early stuff with Keith Morris. I like Damage, man, and My War. Those are my favorites. I do like Dez's vocals and Ron Reyes' vocals, but yeah, from Black Flag, I really sort of like reverse engineered how punk rock turned into hardcore, and I understood the appeal of the Ramones. I bought Get in the Van, which I have talked about, and read that and ate it up, and really took all that stuff to heart about just doing everything yourself. And yeah, that's it. Just like taking control of your own destiny. And that's remained like a big theme in Spirit Adrift's music, and the way that I've navigated the music business, you know, and recently having to remind myself, like, I need to shed a lot of the excess bullshit that's going on, you know? So I worked my way sort of backwards. Rollins talks about, Stooges Funhouse and Get in the Van. So I checked that out, and I really love that record and still do. I think that's the first punk record. I think the Stooges are kind of the first punk band, honestly. I know a lot of people think it's Sex Pistols or whatever. It's probably the same deal as Black Sabbath. Like, I think Black Sabbath is the first metal band. So does Corpse Grinder, and you're not going to argue with him. But there's people that want to be like really analytical about it and talk about like Jerusalem by Primitive Man and all this stuff. Not the band Primitive Man, but look up Jerusalem. But they're not the first metal band. Neither is Blue Cheer. Sorry. It's Black Sabbath. And to me, honestly, I think the first punk band is the Stooges. I think they were a little bit ahead of the Sex Pistols, whether they knew they were a punk band or not, right? And I love the Ramones. Like I said, first Ramones record. I loved Black Flag. When I was a senior in high school, a movie came out called American Hardcore. And I think I was already into all of this stuff. But that movie turned me on to even more underground stuff, like Texas stuff, like Offenders. I hadn't heard that band. Die Kryson, stuff like that. But Black Flag was the beginning. And from there I went, you know, Minor Threat. I think Minor Threat for a time was my favorite band. I shaved my head. I had long hair when I heard Minor Threat. And I heard that stuff and shaved my head, man. I was one of those guys. My friend Matt, who went to Iraq, he shaved my head. I was like, because they were going to shave his head, you know? So it was like partially in solidarity with him, but mainly just inspired by Minor Threat. You know, I was buying DVDs. There's a really great Minor Threat DVD with like a few live shows. Got into Bad Brains. So I was getting into all the East Coast stuff, you know, SSD, and then like the Midwest stuff, Negative Approach. And Poison Idea was a very, very early favorite, right? I got into Cro-Mags in like a very roundabout kind of way. So I was very in touch with what was going on in New Orleans from like 2002 to 2006. This is around the time I met Bower. So I was like really clued into that whole scene And Gary from I Hate God at the time was playing in a band called Hogjaw, Hawg, Hogjaw. And they had a couple killer records. And one of the records, I think it was, they had a record called Don't Trust Nobody and a record called Believe Nothing. And I'm pretty sure I bought Believe Nothing online CD with a t-shirt. And there was a cover of Malfunction by the Cro-Mags on that. And so I discovered Age of Quarrel, and that's my favorite hardcore record, I think. 100%. That's Age of Quarrel is my favorite hardcore record. Has been since the first time I heard it. Completely unhinged. Like, John Joseph's trying to do the HR from Bad Brains thing, obviously, but it's like so much, I don't mean this as an insult, but it's like, he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. It's amazing. It's just like a really raw vocal form of human expression. And those guys were really, they had some shit to express, as we all know. So I was like really all in when I was 17, 18 years old, something like that. But I started trying to get into like the more current stuff, and I never could. I never really could. So, you know, what I love about hardcore is the work ethic, the DIY thing. There is a sense of supporting each other. It has some of the more positive elements of tribalism, but then getting into like the second or third wave stuff, I guess you would call it, all of that is still there. But this, to me, and this is all my opinion, man, and I am the first to admit I'm ignorant of more modern hardcore. Somewhat. I try to keep up with it. There's bands that I love. There's bands that I respect. There's a ton of people that I love, but I'm a little bit ignorant. There was a negative side to it from the beginning. Rollins talks about it in Get in the Van, like these macho type guys showing up that are like jockey, borderline cop type attitude. And whereas a lot of people are going to these shows to have fun and have this sense of community and this love of music, there's a contingency of people that are showing up to hurt people without retaliation. And I've seen a lot of this firsthand, and I'm sure a lot of you have if you're involved in the hardcore scene. I read Harley's book a little while ago. Gatecreeper played with Harley at Sound and Fury one year, and he was so fucking cool, man. He was so nice to us. He's done a lot of work with my friend Arthur. We all know Arthur, Eternal Champions, Sumerlands, Cold World, and has recorded every cool band ever in this whole generation. You know, Harley's a wild motherfucker, man. All good artists are, right? All I can do is judge him on my interaction with him, which was amazing. He was so friendly to us and like so humble. And, you know, I read his book around that time, and he talked about, a lot of people don't know, including myself for a while, Harley is a trained musician. I just like a classic. He was trained by a jazz drummer when he was a small child. He knows music. He knows songwriting. He knows music theory enough to get by as a hardcore musician. Obviously, he knows a lot more than you need to get by, right? So he's a musician first and foremost, right? He's a wild man too, but the guy is a musician down to his soul, right? And I first discovered that by seeing this brilliant video on YouTube. Watch it. If you're a musician or you're at all interested in how music works or rock music or whatever, watch Harley showing you the difference between a badass hardcore rhythm section and a weak hardcore rhythm section. And he's going back and forth from the drums to the bass and really breaking down some like subtle, some subtle techniques that you might not know. You might not know with your ears that band A is doing it right and band B is doing it wrong, but you know in your bones when you hear it done right, and he shows you how to do it right, and it is fucking awesome, man. He's going back from drums to bass, like I said, and just like, it is, I'm getting fired up just thinking about it. And I remember I was a Cro-Mags fan for years already, and I saw that video. I was like, what the fuck? And I read his book, and yeah, come to find out, he was trained from a very, very young age on jazz drumming, you know. But he talks about in his book, watching the thing in New York transform from being about music, which I think to him, it was always first and foremost about music. And to me, it's always first and foremost about music. That's it. Anything else is secondary. Who your friends are, what you're wearing, what, you know, there's crews and hardcore and all that shit. That's all like, none of that shit has ever mattered to me, honestly. And not disrespecting anybody that's involved in that stuff, but it's just about the music. And Harley talks about how he watched it go from being just about the music to all of a sudden there's like bands being formed that can't fucking play worth a shit. They can't play worth a shit. But it's about this like meathead, violent, communal, tribal thing, right? And a lot of these people had really tough upbringings and stuff. And I understand that you want to feel like you belong to something, right? I'm very individualistic myself. I'm an only child, and I'm a loner, and you know, sometimes I want to complain about like not having a tribe or not being accepted by this group or this group or this, but I mean, a lot of that is like self-inflicted, right? But I, even being as much of an individualistic person as I am, I understand wanting to be a part of something, but when the music sucks, but these bands are getting all this support because they're part of this crew or that crew, or this tastemaker person that's an arbitrary tastemaker like signed off on this band, so everyone just arbitrarily loves it. These are the negative aspects of this stuff that have, I think, kind of prevented me from participating as much as I could be nowadays, you know. And these are broad generalizations. You could say the same thing about any subculture or any music genre, right? If you were to judge country music based on the majority of the stuff that's played on the radio, or like these guys that are rewriting their lyrics to not talk about Bud Light as a fuck you to the trans community, or that, all of that nonsense, like if you judged country music based on those guys, you would think it was fucking lame, because those guys suck. They're assholes, man. So like, I mean, metal has its faults too, you know. People treating women like garbage and fucking giant egos and shit like that. So if you judge any genre of music or any subculture on the negative aspects of it, you're going to have a bad time, right? So as with anything else, I think it's important to focus on the stuff that you do like and ignore the stuff that you don't like. That being said, I am going to tell a quick story just to illustrate what I'm talking about here. We played with Crowbar in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And, you know, Crowbar to me is a New Orleans band that's inspired by the Melvins and Carnivore and Trouble, right? They're really a metal band. If you talk to Kirk, you'll know they're a metal band. They're not a hardcore band. But because of some of their breakdowns and some of the DBD parts and a lot of, you know, they're adjacent to like Josta and the Hatebreed thing and stuff like that. Hardcore dudes love Crowbar. Great, man. It's kind of like Motorhead back in the day. They united metalheads and punk fans, which at the time there was no crossover, right? So I think bands that are unifying like that, it's a good thing. However, we played with Crowbar in Atlantic City. When Crowbar played, there were 3 females up front, and there was a huge guy who was by himself punching everybody around him, including these females. He punched this one girl in the head like many times, right? There was another guy in jean shorts that looked like an African-American Bob Ross. That's like the only way I know how to describe him. And this was a big boy. He was a fucking... The guy punching the girl was a big boy, but Violent Bob Ross was like a whole other deal. And he got sick of it and fucking body slammed this dude onto the ground and started beating the shit out of him. But it turns out this guy that's punching women in the back of the head, unprovoked, right? Even if it was provoked, why are you punching a woman? Call me old fashioned, but you know, I don't think giant men should punch women. I know that's like outdated gendered thinking, right? But anyway, this guy punching women, Bob Ross slams him, beating the shit out of him. And it turns out the guy is part of this like crew, like one of these little rascal fucking, I don't know if they congregate in like a tree house or what their deal was. But anytime the guy punching the women was getting retaliated upon, he wasn't really getting any retaliation because like 5 of these big guys are dragging this guy off of him. And can we cut that out, man? Like, there's this whole contingency. I mean, I see it at metal shows here and again, but like, why do you want to? There's a word for somebody that wants to hurt another person without retaliation. There's a lot of words. Coward is one of them. Bully is one of them, right? There's a lot more, but I'll just stop there. There's something really like frightening and serial killery about that. Like, work on your shit, man. If you feel like the urge to punch a woman in the back of the head over and over, kind of concerned you're probably like torturing little animals and shit too. And it seems like the hardcore scene is kind of like a fertile area for guys like this to just act out without any fear of like consequence or whatever. Might I suggest that if you want to punch somebody, go to an MMA gym or something like that. Go to a kickboxing gym. Go to a boxing gym. Walk in there and hit somebody and see what the fuck happens, dude. If you're trying to put yourself in an environment where you can inflict physical pain upon another person and they're like expected to not do it back to you, you're a fucking piece of shit. Figure your shit out or walk into traffic. Fuck off. You're ruining it for everybody. Okay, so my little rant over. Hope they don't come after me. This whole train of thought was provoked by my attending of the Mexican Coke, Heaven's Gate, Dead Heat, Mind Force show at the Mohawk. I get a little like, I don't know, I get a little self-conscious participating in hardcore activities. I feel fine at most metal shows. Black metal shows, I feel a little weird, especially when people have like face paint on and shit. And this is all my own stuff. This has nothing to do with anybody else. This is my own insecurities for the most part, right? It's very rare that I've seen a guy punch a woman in the back of the head 15 times for no reason at a hardcore show. It does happen. But the vast majority of them that I've attended have been awesome. And this was no different. I miss Mexican Coke, unfortunately. They're like, these guys are, okay, great band name, right? And these guys are starting to like really get a reputation around here. And I've heard lots of things about double-barreled shotguns and many laws being violated and stuff like that. And hell yeah, it reminds me of a younger version of me for sure. So I'm kind of bummed I missed them. And hopefully I'll get to see them. So, cause like all over the country, I've heard about these guys. And not bad stuff, but just like, whoa, those guys are fucking crazy, right? I love it. I'm glad somebody is still acting like that. Heaven's Gate is, you know, my friend Tony from The Waste on vocals and my buddy Paul from Cannibal Corpse on drums. I don't know the other 2 guys. I wish I could have met them, but I mainly went to this show to catch up with those dudes. You know, I had just seen Tony, but I haven't seen Paul in forever. And he is one of the nicest dudes in the entire world. Great band. Got their shirt on. Great logo. Great presentation. You know, Heaven's Gate was the cult of loonies on the West Coast that were convinced they were like aliens reincarnated as Jesus or something, and that the mothership was going to come get them. Love that stuff. I love anything cult related, true crime related. And these dudes were playing all kinds of samples of like the leaders of the cult talking in between songs and stuff. Really cool riffs. I like hardcore with riffs and musicianship, and they got it. And they covered a Poison Idea song. That's one of my favorite hardcore bands. Yeah, and I walked into that show like very, like I said, self-conscious. I feel like when I go to hardcore shows, it's like I'm rarely the oldest guy there, but I still feel like I'm too old. Sometimes I feel like I'm being judged, or that I'm not cool enough to be there or something, or I don't know enough about this or that. I feel like a poser. Like I kind of, yeah, that's what it is. I feel like a little bit of a poser, even though I love a lot of hardcore and punk rock music. And it's like just as important to me as anything else that I've discovered. Yeah. I just feel like I'm like out of touch with, or I'm almost kind of like anti a lot of the, I don't know. Some of it reminds me of like political parties. There's like a tribalism, there's a positive nature to it, but there's like a little bit of a like arbitrary, like I'm going to support this guy no matter what, because he's a Democrat. Let's not think about the fact that he was against gay marriage 2 days ago. He's one of us, so I support him, right? Or on the opposite side, like I'm going to support this guy no matter what. He loves freedom, except for that freedom, but let's forget about that because I'm on his team and we wear the same colors, right? So I feel a little bit of that vibe. But again, I went to the actual show. Like most of that shit's just in my head, man. Went to the show and like everybody there was super cool. I had a couple people come up to me and talk about Spirit Adrift and how much they dug it. And I'm just like building all this shit up in my head. Like I'm a poser for being at this hardcore show. And then people are super cool. The music was super cool and it was a great time. Yeah, so that's it. It got me thinking about punk and hardcore and all of that. And I'm going to try to make a little bit more of an effort to focus on the aspects of it that I like and not the aspects that I don't like. And it was with that mindset that I went and listened to this band Gel that I keep hearing about. And I fucking loved it. I loved it. So I'm going to try doing that a little more often. I love that Poison Ruin band too. They're like a punk band. But yeah, shout out Gel, man. They put a record out this year, and it'll probably be on my year-end list. It reminds me of every cool hardcore band that I've discussed during this episode. So yeah, man, that's my relationship with punk, rock, and hardcore. It's been the old stuff has been a very big part of my musical life, and I need to make more of an effort of like looking for stuff that's current that I like, instead of being like our boy Adam from episode 1 and thinking that there's not anything good out right now. Because that band Gel is really good. And there's all kinds of great hardcore bands, I'm sure. I am going to talk about a band that sort of unifies the metalheads and the punks. Annihilation Time. Man, I love this band. These 2 records behind me, their first record's okay. Sorry guys, it's okay. Their second record is like a life-changing, huge record for me and a lot of other people. And their third record is like, I like it just about as good as the second record. So I told the story of meeting Municipal Waste with the 60 or 90 beers in 2006, and Ryan Waste said, what bands do you like? What are your favorite bands? I said Black Sabbath and Black Flag. And he goes, dude, you need to check out our friend's band Annihilation Time, because it's like 50-50. So I did. I downloaded it off of SoulSeek. Sorry. Obviously I've since spent money on their stuff. And man, first song, Imaginary Mirror. Holy shit, I'm sold. It's everything cool about punk and everything cool about metal and none of the bullshit. It's like lo-fi without sounding like too intentionally vintage. I remember on their MySpace page, they had like their influences, all this stuff, and like Deep Purple in rock playing at 45 RPM instead of 33 and a third, meaning it's faster, right? There's some Blast, right? California hardcore band from back in the day, Blast. Yeah, Deep Purple, 80s Guitar Hero stuff, like Robin Trower, Frank Marino. These are guys that are like Van Halen kind of, but more obscure-ish and kind of more of like a guitar player's like inside thing. Like, oh, Robin Trower. Like as soon as you say Robin Trower to a guitar player, okay, that guy's cool, right? There's some Scorpions, there's some Black Flag. It's just great, man. It's like, it's got the musicianship that I love of like old new wave of British heavy metal and like proto metal and thrash metal. What draws me to that stuff is the musicianship, like the guitar playing, but also the drumming and bass and stuff like that. But their singer, Jimmy Rose, is like die hard punk rocker dude from Pittsburgh. And he just like makes it something else. There's a ferocity to it, the lyricism. It's punk lyrics, but they're like really, it almost reminds me of country songwriting. The turns of phrases are like so clever and the double meanings and yeah, just saying really insightful stuff in really snotty, clever, sarcastic kind of ways. You know, it has that in common with like the old country lyricism. It's just really fucking cool, man. They're a really good band. They're one of my favorite bands ever. Straight up, Annihilation Time. And I'll tell a quick little story before we go back to fan mail and wrap this up. I was in 2 bands in high school. First band was called Still Broke. I got that name from the I Hate God live record, 10 Years of Abuse and Still Broke. Pretty good band name. No, sorry, that was the second band. The first band, terrible band name, Weasel's Night Out. I got that from the DVD chapters of Fargo. That's the scene where Steve Buscemi's like banging the hooker. Sorry, sex worker. Can't say that anymore. And the guy comes in with the belt, beats the shit out of him. That scene was called Weasel's Night Out. So those were my high school bands. And I moved to Arkansas. I'm going to do an episode about Arkansas. But short version, I started a band there. And our first show we played, I was like all over MySpace at the time, right? Proto social media. And Annihilation Time had done a tour in between the second and third albums. They had gone to the East Coast and they were making their way back home to Oakland. And they were looking for a show on MySpace. And so I messaged them and I said, hey, my friend Austin has a house where he does shows and they're killer. And they were killer. Thinking, you know, I'm 18 years old? I'm thinking there's no way they're going to pay any attention to me. They messaged me back and they were like, where's it at? And so my first band in Arkansas's first show ended up being with Annihilation Time. And I remember they called me the day of on the way to the house and were like, hey man, we're so-and-so, should we go to the liquor store? And I said, man, we got you a lot of stuff. Like there's a lot of liquor here. I was like, we got like 90 beers, 120 beers, handle of Jim Beam, probably 2 handles of Jim Beam. A handle is like a half gallon for those of you who don't know. Yeah, half gallon of like every kind of liquor there was and like 100 and something beers, right? I tell him that. I'm like, that's just for the bands. There's like other stuff here too. And there's a hesitation on the line. Yeah, we should probably go to the liquor store. So they went to the liquor store for whatever reason and showed up with like way more stuff, which is good because I remember somebody dropped a handle of Jim Beam and it exploded on the floor. These guys at the time, I'm going to see if I can find a picture of it. I'm sure I can. They had like a shuttle bus or like a van. It was like a pre-Sprinter van. And it was for some like retirement home or something that had been decommissioned, right? And the place, it was called like either the retirement home or the vehicle was called the Country Connection. Well, they had scratched out some choice letters. So the side of this thing said the cunt connection. So they they roll up in this thing and Yeah, we destroyed Austin's house. Not destroyed, but like raged. Fucking amazing show. Amazing. And I remember like that band I was in at the time, I kind of like lifted a riff from an Annihilation Time song, reworked it, of course. But I went up to their guitar player afterwards, Graham, who's still a bud. And I was like, hey man, I don't know if you heard that. Sorry, I ripped off one of your riffs. He's like, no, I didn't even hear it, man. It's all good. I probably ripped it off from Bach anyway. J.S. Bach, you know. Jimmy Rose goes, I heard it. Oh man, I fucking love that band. I love those guys so much. They were telling me Jimmy had just gotten his tooth knocked out by a Mohawk punk. That was his words. I fucking hate Mohawk punks, man. It had a very specific prejudice against the Mohawk variety of punks, right? They told me a story about how a couple days before, I think they were in Arkansas and they were trying to lay low. They were super hungover and like feeling weird. So their version of laying low, I guess, was to go to Chuck E. Cheese, right? We went to Chuck E. Cheese in the middle of the Bible Belt, looking the way they looked, and we're trying to be all low key because everyone was staring at them. They're drinking beers in Chuck E. Cheese for some damn reason. And I said they were like getting uncomfortable because everybody was looking at them. So I tried to get out of there all low key, went out the fire door and the fucking alarm went off and the place got evacuated and shit. So they played their set, right? It was incredible. It was almost all stuff from the second record. Played one of my favorite songs from their Cosmic Unconsciousness EP, which is the one I kind of like repurposed for our song. And I think they played Jonestown from the third record, and that's it from the third record. I don't even know if they had recorded that yet. One of the best shows I'd ever seen in my friend Austin's living room. Fucking incredible. If anybody from Arkansas is listening to that and you have pictures of that, send them to me. I saw some recently, but I don't know where the hell they are. I'll see if I can dig them up. And so after we played at Austin's house, which was kind of on the outskirts of Fayetteville, we loaded these dudes up. Half of them were going to stay with my friend Brandon, and half of them were going to stay with me at a tiny townhouse that I was living in. We went to Brandon's house first. It was called the Blue House, affectionately, in Fayetteville, Arkansas, because it was painted bright blue. We didn't destroy Austin's house where the show was. That was manageable. We destroyed Brandon's house, and he was in on it too. I had the garden hose inside the house spraying everybody at one point. Their roadie did a front flip off a table while the ceiling fan was on high and just went straight through the blades and ripped it out of the fucking ceiling, destroyed. Yeah, it was a good time. We found some shopping carts. I think Jimmy and Noel stayed with me, the singer and drummer, and everybody else stayed with Brandon. And on our way back to my house, we found shopping carts and we're pushing each other into the ditch in shopping carts. And I remember, sorry to Noel, but the next day, the pillow that Noel had slept on, I had to throw the fucking whole thing away. Like, not the pillowcase. I just had to, we had to burn that pillow. So that was my experience with Annihilation Time. I was thinking about them because I posted about some records the other day, Saviors records, and me and Sonny from Saviors were talking. Of course, Annihilation Time's a Bay Area band, Saviors is a Bay Area band, and he was telling me stories of the legendary Annihilation Time house in the Bay. One of the best rock and roll bands ever, musically, but also just the way they carried themselves. I personally can't live like that anymore. It almost killed me, but I still look up to that and value that and encourage that so much for people who are able to do it. And they were the kings of that shit. Man, and just such a mythology behind that band too. Even, touring with Nails, Todd Jones was telling me about how he lived in the Annihilation Time house as a straight edge guy and heard them write the whole second record. I think maybe they might have been straight edge at the time. Cause I can't dude, I can't imagine being straight edge around those guys. It was about as far from that as you could possibly get. So I've heard rumblings that they might not be totally done. Every once in a while, Annihilation Time will pop off, get a wild hair, and play a show. I know Graham's off in Australia now. I talk to him occasionally. I talk to Chris, the bass player, occasionally. If they get back together, I'm going wherever they are. They played New York when I was on tour, and I didn't get to see it, but they were a top 10 favorite band for me. Put them in the top 10. Bing. Top 10 favorite band, Annihilation Time. Hank is wondering what the hell I'm doing with all these weird noises. All right, we're almost done, I promise. I'm going to go back to fan mail here. Okay, David, who is originally from Chile, but he's in Finland now. David says, we did an interview last week and I didn't have time to ask you a question, and I hope you could answer it in the podcast. Here you go, David. Hope you made it this far. Sorry if you didn't. Do you have a favorite Black Sabbath era and or album? Of course, it would be cool to hear the reasons as well. And then he recommends a record, Avstånd by Slegest. I know Slate, that band, but Slegest. I'll check that out. Well, Paranoid was the first thing I heard, and it changed my life, which is kind of fitting for this episode, because if you listen to the song Paranoid, that might be the first punk song. It's the first one I heard, for sure. No, it's not. I heard like Green Day and shit probably on the radio, but it's the first one I heard where I was like, that is really cool and I need to know more about that. So Paranoid holds a special place in my heart, right? It's their highest selling album, Until Heaven and Hell. My favorite eras, I think they really figured their shit out in the studio on Master of Reality. For better or worse. Like, there's a charm to the first two albums, a little bit of amateurish stuff going on in the best possible way. The playing is tighter, I think, on the first two albums because they had a really long, extensive residency in Hamburg at the Star Club, right? Same as the Beatles. So they were really playing their asses off. And if you look at footage, look up Paris 1970, Black Sabbath, best band in the world. So that's a great era, the early era. Studio-wise, my favorite Ozzy stuff is Master of Reality through Sabotage. I think that's where they're like peaking in the studio. I think that's where the decline begins in the live arena because the drug use is going up, the stress is going up, the fame is distracting them from stuff, but the creativity was going up and up and up and up all the way through Sabotage. So that's a favorite era for sure. I'm not crazy about Technical Ecstasy. I like some of it. All Moving Parts Stand Still is one of Geezer's best bass lines. Dirty Women's great. I do like some songs on Never Say Die also. Don't fucking tell me Johnny Blade and Junior's Eyes aren't two of the best songs they've ever done, man. You know that Johnny's a spider. That's the most Ozzy sounding line that Ozzy ever sang. Go listen to Johnny Blade. You know that Johnny's a spider. The most Ozzy sounding line ever. I love the period when Dio joined. Obviously, Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules are like two of my favorite albums ever. That was like a resurrection of the band too. And I like Tony Martin. I like the Headless Cross album and Tear and right in there. You know, that's a good era. I really liked when they renamed themselves to Heaven and Hell. We all know that was Black Sabbath. That album, The Devil You Know, is killer. It's great. And the last tour that they did, I saw them 3 times. I saw them in 2004 with the original lineup. I saw them probably in 2012 or 13. And then I saw that last tour. And the last tour was the best. It was the best. They had Rick Wakeman's son, Adam, on keyboards and second guitar. He was going back and forth. He was off stage. But it sounded super heavy. So, somebody's telling me to shut the fuck up. I bet. Now, that's the longest possible answer ever. But those are my favorite eras of Black Sabbath. The short answer is Every era. Okay, Janet, what up, Janet? Finally getting to your question. Sorry. Janet is the world's biggest Corrosion of Conformity fan. I can verify that. And she says, since it's coming from me, I think you know what's coming. What is your favorite COC song / album / riff? Can't wait for the new album, Another Tour. Okay. I bought COC Animosity in keeping with the theme of our episode. That's their crossover period before Pepper Keenan, even before Blind, before the other guy, right? Carl. They were a 3-piece, and I bought it because it looked cool. It was Pusshead artwork. I knew him from Metallica. I was getting guitar lessons from this legend, dude, real old school blues man, Ray Sales in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. He's still teaching at the mall in Bartlesville. But at the time, he was teaching in this strip mall and this kind of pawn shop, music instrument, methy, always changing hands, always changing names. And I would go in there for guitar lessons from Ray. Dude changed my life, man. Taught me how to play the blues. Straight up. It's like fucking Metalocalypse episode. I love you, Ray Sales, if you're out there, man. But anyway, man, I'm getting all... Okay, so I saw COC Animosity in there, bought it. So that's my favorite COC album. It's hard to beat that when you're 13 or whatever. And I think my favorite song of theirs that really stood out to me was Holier from that album. In your mind, you found him. In my mind, where's your God? He's in your head. That fucking lyric, man, that's when I was really sick of fucking conservative Christians, and I still am. But yeah, so favorite album, Animosity, favorite song is Holier, but my favorite riff, the first time I saw them was on In the Arms of God. And that's the first time I saw Weed Eater. That's the first time I saw Alabama Thunder Pussy, Crowbar. Yeah, New York City, baby. I got this tattooed on me, 17 years old right there. And there's a song on that record called It Is That Way Because It Is. Over now, and I'm going down. Yeah, that riff, that's their best riff. No doubt in my mind to me. Everybody loves Albatross. Great riffs in that song, but you know, I like the intro track to Blind too. Evil. The instrumental like intro. But I will say the best COC riff to me, It Is That Way Because It Is. That one. It's really good. All right, last bit of fan mail here. Okay, thanks, Janet. I hope we see you soon. Janet was at like, I don't know how many of those shows we did with COC, but a lot. JR. I found out about Spirit Adrift last year when I saw you in a Loudwire video. 11 most influential bands or something like that. That might have been a Revolver video. Then I listened to you guys. I was blown away. Your music is familiar yet new and refreshing. When I checked tour dates, you'd already played here in Jacksonville, Florida, home of Leonard Skinner. I was so fucking pissed I missed it. Then I couldn't make it last month when you were here. I don't give a fuck what is going on. If you play in Jacksonville again, or Florida for that matter, I'm not going to miss you guys again. I'm going to hold you to that, bro. I got your email. I could probably find your home address just off of that, dude. Okay. I feel that now is the best and worst time for discovering new bands. Best and worst time. Yeah, it really is. There is so much music available to discover. The problem is that it is so saturated that it's hard to get through all of it. You talked about going and looking at the art on records, tapes, CDs, and gambling on buying a band you've never heard of. I remember those days. Those were much simpler times. Yeah, we're those guys now. I remember buying Haunting the Chapel on cassette when it was released. Hell yeah, I'm kind of an old metalhead. My favorite kind, dude. What is your take on how saturated the current market is in finding great new music today? I feel like I should have discovered Spirit Adrift sooner. Hey man, you discovered it at the right time. That's it. We'll be back to Florida. I was born in Florida and I fucking love Florida. All the Florida shit talking needs to stop, dude. Hateful motherfuckers don't represent the whole state of Florida. There's a lot more to it. There's hateful people everywhere, man. And Florida rules. Florida is like the most American feeling place that I've ever been, for sure. It's like there's just a vibe that anything is possible, right? What's the question? Okay, finding music. Man, speaking personally, I think what's going to happen with Spirit Adrift is that there's never going to be some big moment of discovery where all these people discover us. We're just going to outlast people and bands who aren't as much of lifers as I am and we are. You know, I don't know that St. Vitus was super popular when they were on their first stretch of being a functioning band. I always go back to the Dave Chandler thing of like, what's the key to success? We'll break up and get back together 10 years later and people will love you. Well, how about just do what Motorhead did or do what Crowbar did and just keep going forever, right? So I think a lot of bands get discovered because they just like won't go away, right? Some bands get discovered because they blow up, and that's like a rare coalescence of like timing, luck, opportunity, culture, society, and maybe some string pulling going on behind the scenes and all that, or just having all the right variables at the right time, right? But if you're making music and thinking about all of that, your music's probably going to suck, honestly. So it's like, for me, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing forever. And we're going to keep getting a little bit more discovered as we go, right? So that's my take on that as a guy making music from the inside, right? That's like my insider take. My take as a fan, how do I discover new music? Usually it's word of mouth, man. That's why that's the most important thing. That's why touring is so important. Because you can be like an industry plant band and have all these forces behind the scenes, like shoving your cow, pig, horse shit down the throats of music fans. But I don't think that you're going to get lifelong fans that way. It might pan out for a few years, right? What works is getting real fans that see you in person or that happen to hear you maybe on a playlist or something. Everybody in the industry talks about how important playlisting is. I don't think so. Everybody talks about how important social media is. I don't think so. Speaking personally, the only thing that I've detected any sort of big jump in popularity or whatever is touring, right? Because you notice when bands are touring, because any asshole can put a song on Spotify, put a video on YouTube, crushing it on 8 hours of sleep in their air-conditioned home, however many takes they need, right? But you don't get any of those leniencies on tour. So I think bands that want to be discovered need to tour. Number one thing, right? Every once in a blue moon, I might randomly discover something I like on a playlist or something like that. But yeah, speaking personally, I keep track of what labels are doing, labels that I like, whether that's our label, Century Media. I'm always paying attention to $20 Spin. I sign up to his mailing list. Always paying attention to Relapse, Metal Blade, Nuclear Blast. There's like underground labels, Shadow Kingdom and stuff like that. Really though, it's word of mouth, man. That's it. Somebody tells me. Somebody will text me, hey, did you hear this? Now I got this podcast, so that's cool. People will email me, hey, did you hear this? You guys are kind of like getting the gist of what I like and don't like. So yeah, it's word of mouth. Number one way to find out about music. Because it is too saturated. And a lot of bands that are really well known and popular can't fucking play because the requirements for entry are more lax than they've been in the history of music, right? Which, like you said, is a good and bad thing. I talked about it on the first like few episodes of this. But yeah, word of mouth. Yeah, sign up for our mailing list if you're listening to this and you haven't already. Go to spiritadrift.com and sign up for that. that's a good way of keeping track of what's going on. I'm probably going to delete our Facebook. I fucking hate Facebook so much. I hope those two idiots do beat the shit out of each other. The Zuck and the fucking Elon. I hate all that shit. So sign up for our mailing list. Subscribe to this. Write me an email, bigriffenergy@gmail.com. And word of mouth is the best way for bands that don't suck and aren't being forced on you by some fucking reptilian Illuminati overlords. Word of mouth is the best way for bands that don't suck to pay their bills. That's all we want. That's like the ultimate dream back in the day was, I want a Ferrari and a mansion and everything. Like the most fantastical dream in 2023 is paying your fucking bills. That's it. So word of mouth is great. So tell some friends about this. Tell some friends about Spirit Adrift or any other bands that you dig. We got a new record coming out, man. All right. Is this my longest podcast? It might be. Thanks for making it this far. Love you. See you next time.